We begin our broadcast in the United States, where excitement in the U.S. Democratic Party is rising after Vice President Kamala Harris named Tim Walz as her running mate Tuesday. But the presumed Democratic Party nominee wasn't alone, making news in one of America's oldest cities, Philadelphia, in the northeastern state of Pennsylvania. That's where we find VOA senior Washington correspondent Caroline Presutti.
In a town where the Founding Fathers declared independence, Philadelphia on Tuesday showing off the peaks of democracy with both political parties. For the first time, Vice President Kamala Harris, the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, introduces her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
Tim and I have a message for Trump and others who want to turn back the clock on our fundamental freedoms. We're not going back.
Army soldier turned high school teacher turned football coach turned politician. Walz directly attacked the Republican ticket.
Just an observation of mine that I made. I just have to say it. You know it, you feel it. These guys are creepy and yes, just weird as hell. That's what you see. That's what you see.
Some Democrats say Walz will bring back former Trump Democrats from swing states.
I think that that's a core demographic that the Harris campaign will have to win, and I think Tim that really speaks to those voters.
Just a few hours prior, on the other side of town,
and she ought to answer for the fact.
The other side, Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance held his own rally with a unique twist, answering questions from the media.
Let's talk a little bit about foreign policy.
And with some sharp words for Harris's running mate.
Tim Walz's record is a joke. He's been one of the most far-left radicals in the entire United States government at any level.
What your ancestors...
Vance struck out at Democrats on immigration, fentanyl, and the economy, calling the stock market drop the Kamala crash. Undecided voter Wayne Eastman carried Vance's memoir as he stood in line to see the rally.
It's unusual to have a politician who's a writer too, so, curious.
In 90 days, U.S. voters will make the decision between a former president and a current vice president. But the Harris team is pushing a chant to avoid a Trump repeat. From here, the Harris-Walz team visits 5 more battleground states in the next 5 days: Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. Caroline Presutti, VOA News, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Vice President Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have kicked off a 7-state trip to some of the biggest battleground states in the election. VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara has more.
The highly anticipated announcement has been made. Vice President Kamala Harris has selected Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. Tim is a battle-tested leader who has an incredible track record of getting things done for Minnesota families, Harris said in a statement. I know that he will bring that same principled leadership to our campaign and to the office of the vice president. Progressives had been rallying around the 60-year-old Walz, who championed left-leaning policies as governor of Minnesota, a state in the Midwest part of the country that is critical to electoral victory. The former U.S. Army National Guard member and teacher is seen as appealing to rural white voters.
A progressive who's been able to win rural red conservative districts, who's been able to win across Minnesota, even in the non-progressive enclaves, who is somebody who owns a gun and fought and was a combat veteran and is born in Nebraska. And so it's somebody who understands Middle America.
In November, Harris and Walz will go against Republican nominee former President Donald Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance.
Tim Walz's record is a joke. He's been one of the most far-left radicals in the entire United States government at any level. But I think that what Tim Walz's selection says is that Kamala Harris has bent the knee to the far left of her party, which is what she always does.
Even before the Harris campaign formally announced Walz as her pick for vice president, the Trump campaign released a statement calling him a dangerously liberal extremist. Walz recently raised his profile as an effective attack dog against Trump and Vance, calling them weird. He has 3 months to introduce himself to American voters. Harris and Walz will set off on a tour across key battleground states, beginning with Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Tuesday evening. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
Now to East Africa, where heavy rains have triggered building collapses that have killed at least 17 people in northern Sudan as the country reels from almost 16 months of fighting between rival security forces, according to the AFP news agency. The infrastructure minister from Sudan's River Nile state says over 11,000 homes have collapsed and at least 170 people have been injured. Each year in August, peak flow on the Nile River is accompanied by torrential rains, destroying homes, wrecking infrastructure and claiming lives both directly and indirectly through waterborne diseases. The impact is expected to be worse this year after more than 12 months of fighting that has pushed millions of displaced people into flood zones. The United Nations Climate Crisis Coordinator and a top World Food Programme official are in Southern Africa assessing a drought-driven humanitarian crisis blamed on the El Niño weather phenomenon and climate change. Columbus Mavunga has the details.
Winding up her two-day visit to Zimbabwe on Thursday in the country's El Niño-affected Matopo district, UN Assistant Secretary General Rina Gelani appealed immediately to the international community for $430 million to ease the food insecurity in the Southern African nation. Gelani, who is also the UN Climate Crisis Coordinator for the El Niño response, told VOA that most of the countries feeling the effects of the climate change did not cause it.
Africa has only produced less than 4% of greenhouse gas emissions, and yet you can see here in Zimbabwe and then in these southern African countries, massive impact. We need to urgently be investing in communities and supporting governments on not only mitigating the climate crisis, reducing emissions, but also, because it's here today, helping communities to adapt to the changes that we're seeing.
The naturally occurring El Niño climate pattern has affected southern African countries for decades, but the droughts have been coming more often and with greater intensity in recent years as global temperatures rise. One of those affected is Begazela Dube, a mother of four, now depending on odd jobs to survive because all her crops were burnt by the sun.
This year's rain season was really very bad, as we did not receive sufficient rainfall, and we did not manage to harvest anything from our field. Even watermelons failed to grow.
The World Food Programme says 5 southern African countries, Lesotho, Malawi, Namibia, Zambia and Zimbabwe, have declared the drought a national disaster. Angola and Mozambique are also feeling the impacts.
People are talking about a drought that's more severe than they've seen in 40 years in the country. But we're seeing similar things play out across an additional 6 countries in southern Africa, where 27 million people are facing hunger this year because of the El Niño situation.
Zimbabwe's next harvest is not expected until March. Obey Chaputsira, a Matopo district coordinator, says Zimbabwe's government is trying to limit the effects of the drought in his district, where 45,000 people are getting free grain and throughout the country.
We have also embarked on the program of drilling bores, because most of our bores, they are seasonal in the district, so most of them are starting to dry up. We have a comparative advantage that we have a lot of sand in our rivers, so we are extracting water from that sand and coming up with piped water schemes.
The government hopes these efforts produce enough water for vegetable gardens to ensure communities have a balanced diet as they wait for the next rains expected in late October. Columbus Mavunga, VOA News, Matopo, Zimbabwe.
The U.S. said on Wednesday it would provide nearly $414 million in humanitarian assistance for the Democratic Republic of Congo, where more than 25 million people need such aid, nearly a quarter of the country's population. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Agencies for Food and Agriculture, Jeffrey Prescott, told Reuters a significant amount of that money would go to the United Nations agencies and aid groups providing urgent food assistance, healthcare and nutrition support, shelter, water, sanitation and hygiene. It takes total U.S. funding for DRC since October to $838 million, according to Prescott. A UN aid appeal for $2.6 billion for DRC this year is only one-third funded, and the World Health Organization warned last month that more than 1 million children are at risk from acute malnutrition in Congo. British police braced for more anti-Muslim riots on Wednesday as far-right groups pledged to target asylum centers and immigration law firms across the country, prompting anti-fascist protesters to plan counter-demonstrations. Britain has been gripped by an escalating wave of violence that erupted early last week when 3 young girls were killed in a knife attack in northwest Britain. The assault triggered a wave of forced messaging online that wrongly identified the suspected killer as an Islamist migrant. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, a former chief prosecutor who is facing his first crisis since winning a July 4th election, is warning rioters they will face lengthy jail terms. Starmer seeks to stamp out the worst outbreak of violence in Britain in 13 years. The government has assembled a so-called standing army of 6,000 specialist police force officers to respond to any outbreaks of violence and say they will have a big enough presence to deal with any unrest. Still to come, a U.S. election season that's filled with unexpected twists and turns. We'll be back in a moment.
On the next Straight Talk Africa. Generation Z protesters in Kenya take to the streets demanding change. They want good governance, accountability, and an end to corruption. They're not alone. They have inspired Nigerian youth protesting the high cost of living. Join me, Vincent Makori, for an in-depth discussion on a new generation of young people trying to make a difference.
Since 2014, the Young African Leaders Initiative, or YALI, has brought 500 young people from across Africa to the United States to study business, entrepreneurship, public management, and civic leadership at 20 American universities. On the next edition of Our Voices, we will introduce you to some extraordinary young African women from over the past decades to share their experiences in the Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders program. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, the Palestinian militant group Hamas chose Yahya Sinwar as its top official in Gaza, who masterminded the October 7th attacks in Israel, as its new leader. The group's political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was killed July 31st in Iran by a presumed Israeli strike. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says Sinwar now has the power to ensure that a ceasefire deal is reached for the Israel-Hamas war. A senior UN humanitarian official says the confirmation of a famine in parts of Sudan's Darfur region is a must wake-up call for the international community. The World Food Programme and other humanitarian agencies' worst fears were realized when international food monitors confirmed on Friday that more than a year of war has pushed parts of North Darfur into famine. And Egypt's local currency is slipping against the US dollar after recent hikes in fuel prices and subway fares. The new exchange rates come just a week after the International Monetary Fund completed its third review for Egypt, allowing the government to draw $820 million. That amount is part of an $8 billion bailout loan that is meant to help the country's ailing economy. The Mandela Washington Fellowship for the Young African Leaders Initiative culminated its three-day summit here in Washington. Viewers Philip Alexiou and Anthony Labruto have more on the fellows from all over sub-Saharan Africa that visited the U.S. Capitol.
During the three-day summit of the Mandela Washington Fellowship, young African leaders networked with public and private companies, trained in civic leadership and public management with companies from around the country, and got a chance to meet with several U.S. representatives. The summit is a culmination of the yearly 6-week leadership program. Isabel Coleman, the deputy administrator at the U.S. Agency for International Development, and other representatives from the U.S. expressed how valuable the youth of the African continent are and why the U.S. continues to invest with YALI.
You are part of an incredible alumni group as YALI Fellows. And everywhere I go, I'm just astounded, amazed at the entrepreneurship and the energy and the idealism and the can-do, amazing spirit of all of these YALI graduates. I hope that you will continue to remember the passion that brought you here and infuse it in all of the work that you're doing, no matter where that leads you over the course of your lifetime.
In the last decade, the United States has taken a more proactive stance in African continental investment through programs such as the U.S. African Development Foundation, USAID, and most recently, Prosper Africa. Launched in March, includes an e-trade platform that allows instant digital investment in a variety of African and U.S.-based sectors.
It gives access to African companies to 20,000 retail outlets in the U.S. that include Walmart, Target, Sam's Club, Costco. It's a very exciting development.
According to a 2023 report, Prosper Africa has raised $2.1 billion in investment capital for African programs throughout the continent.
Sure, it is exciting to be here today to celebrate the first 10 years. And I think from the bipartisan support that we've seen in Congress, the longevity of this program, the high-level engagement that we've seen throughout the summits that we've had throughout the years, really does show how important this program is. And it really is something that invests in Africa's future. We look at demographics and numbers and see how young Africa's population is and how important it is for us to engage with these young people.
The Young African Leaders Initiative has given fellows a sense of agency in solving the problems they see on the African continent.
And my interaction with other Africans and Americans have taught me that we are powerful, and young people, we do not have to underestimate ourselves.
For others, the program and concluding summit offers a greater perspective on how best to achieve their work.
For me, being a part of this leadership program means being able to tap into the skills that other fellow African young leaders have, being able to connect, being able to collaborate and work together, because I never foresaw for a day that where I would be in a room full of other young African leaders.
So far, some 6,500 fellows between the ages of 25 and 35 have participated in the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program since 2014. Philip Alexiou, VOA News, Washington.
In a U.S. election season that has been filled with unexpected twists and turns, social media users have responded in kind with coconuts and cat ladies. VOA's Tina Trin explains.
What do coconuts, childless cat ladies, and English pop star Charlie XCX have in common? They're all part of the online conversation when it comes to the U.S. presidential election. With just over 3 months until Election Day, voters are encountering social media feeds filled with memes and rhetorical mudslinging.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too.
Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance's past comment on Democratic lawmakers has gone viral, with plenty of cat-filled memes and videos rebuking it. Everyone from former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to Hollywood actress Jennifer Aniston has criticized Vance, who says the comment was taken out of context and that Democratic policies are anti-family. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign is playing on a speech from last year to provide context in its own tongue-in-cheek way, quoting advice from her mother.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
Originally posted in mockery by the Republican National Committee, the quote has since been repurposed by Harris supporters into memes and coconut emojis on social media. Harris's recent entry into the race has generated considerable buzz online, including an endorsement from pop star Charli XCX, who declared on X that Kamala is Brat, the name of her latest album and a reference to the metaphorical it girl of the moment. In response, the Harris campaign adopted the album's lime green color and lowercase font for its profile page on X, while content creators remix the pop artist's songs with Harris's coconut tree reference. In an election season that's been full of surprises, social media users are keeping pace. Tina Trin, VOA News, New York.
The African Development Bank forecasts that Africa's youth population is set to reach 850 million by 2050, with 60% of the continent's population under age 25. Joining us now is technology correspondent Paul Ndiho with the details. Hello, Paul.
Thanks, Esther. Analysts believe Africa's growing youth population allows it to address its long-term development issues and harness its young people's creativity and innovation to drive economic development. Mathoba Chapi, Regional Communication Officer for Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom, says the foundation is launching an initiative to encourage investments in startups across Africa.
There's a lot of young Africans who are coming up, who are, creating initiatives that are, solving localized challenges using means that are available, digitalization, the advancements of different types of innovation. And they are making a living, they are creating jobs, and, not necessarily with the mindset of dispelling this image of Africa that is there internationally, but to help advance themselves, but also to help the young people who are driving these initiatives to get their projects into the international community so that they can get investment for their initiatives and their projects, so that people can see and people can reimagine Africa and invest in Africa and the African economic potential, rather than this mindset, that Africa is the continent that's only going to be, needing support from the international community through aid.
Fascinating stuff. What drives some of these young people? When you've talked to them, what are some of the stories they tell you? What drives them?
It's wanting to make a difference. It's wanting to make a change. It's also young people wanting to live a self-sustained life, which is, as a person who's as representing a liberal institution, working for a liberal institution, is part of the liberal ideology. So they want to self-govern. They want to be the ones that are making a difference in their lives, and not necessarily also being employed. So they're looking at opportunities and what is available, or with what is available to be able to make a life for themselves, to be entrepreneurs. The gig economy also, different forms of approaches to making themselves or advancing their lives on their own. A mindset that is certainly encouraging that the young people are not just sitting and waiting for things to happen. They're creating the opportunities for themselves.
How much of this is being driven by technology, access to internet and electricity?
To be able to convert, one resource into another resource to be able to produce another product means that you need electricity. To be able to sell that product in a very competitive market, for an example, you need internet connectivity, you need to be able to communicate with people, you need contacts. So these are extremely crucial for young people. Internet access is extremely crucial, for example. So there are still challenges that are there. The cost of electricity is expensive, the cost of internet connectivity is expensive, but we believe that that is something that can change through competition, and competition is only going to come through when the right approaches in terms of good governance are brought in, but also the competition by the innovators and the entrepreneurs themselves. And even with those challenges, young people are still finding ways to remain relevant in the products that they are producing.
And I've talked to a lot of young people like yourself across the continent. They talk about the issue of unemployment. Any country you can look at, young people are highly educated. They don't have employment, they don't have a source of income. So how can initiatives like this maybe help some of these young people?
The young people want to make a living for themselves. They also want to transform the lives of their communities, which will also include creating opportunities for other young people, creating employment. We call on the international community to invest in the young people who are job creators, who are helping in the dispelling of this image of Africa that exists, and showcasing the spirit of young Africans as survivors and drivers of change and progress.
Mutoba Chapi is the Frederick Newman Foundation Regional Communications Officer. That's today's Tech Report. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Paul. Be sure to catch Paul Ndiho's Tech Report each Wednesday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.